Welcome to Disposable Society, where we sift through the garbage of stereotypes and discrimination about people with disabilities and pick out the treasures of advocacy, inclusion, and innovation. My name is Caitlin, and for those with visual disabilities, I will describe my appearance today. I am wearing a black tank top, and my hair is dark brown and pulled back into a ponytail. For those with auditory disabilities, I will be offering a full transcript of this episode and descriptions of the images in this episode at my Substack, which is linked below. This week, we will be applying what we learned about biopower from last week's episode to intellectual disability. Just a refresher, biopower is the strategic operation of techniques and machineries to produce docile and economically efficient productive bodies. One of these tools goes way back to the mid-1400s when Gutenberg invented the printing press. Imagine a world where seeing a written text is like seeing a unicorn. Okay, maybe not so exaggerated, but extremely rare. Before the printing press, scribes had to handwrite every text and every copy of every text. So the literature that was produced was very intentional and served a purpose. The author of The Government of Dyslexia, Tom Campbell, argues that the printing press was the most important event to happen in the history of reading. It allowed for an ease of literary mass production. Think of all of the text you come across on any given day. I tracked all of the printed text I came across in an average day in my life, and I'm going to play it now until the end of this video to show how pervasive this invention is in our modern lives. Whoever was able to harness the resource of the printing press had immense governing power, the ability to influence what the population could access, the ability to create knowledge and vocabularies, influencing ways of interpreting the world through guided ways of seeing and ways of saying what it was. Religious texts, while still prominent, were no longer the only text made accessible to the public. The function of books changed at this point, and people in governing positions took notes. Governments saw that literate populations posed a double-edged sword. They saw the potential to influence the public and moralize them through literature, but also feared people would aspire beyond their place in society. Through literacy, they wanted to inject docility while preserving the poor slave class. Because poor people began to read, required literacy of simple text at work became normalized. Curious, I thought about texts that I come across at my job. The ladies' and men's bathroom sign were my first thought. We are also required to read text on a whiteboard that outlines a schedule of the wedding ceremony and reception for the evening and assign tasks. At the end of the night, employees are handed printouts of a checklist of closing tasks that I have to initial. Clocking out procedures also entail reading through prompts and selecting the correct options. We also have to label the liquors and juices and read the labels of various food items selected for customers. It really is in most steps of my night at work. I encourage you to take notice at your school or place of work. I think it will really surprise you. The early 19th century saw the emergence of mass education using literature to infiltrate minds and mold individuals into subjects. During the proposal of the 1807 Poor Bill, the legislator argued that poor people should be taught to read, but not to write, because there was fear of a revolution if the enslaved learned to distribute their ideas. As you can see, this is a consistent concern of governing bodies: keep the workers working and ignorant to their capabilities. However, literacy presented an opportunity to indoctrinate obedience, and this motive informed the decision to pursue mass education for the entire population, even the poor. Schools ultimately became machinery for the government that organized and classified bodies. Beyond literature, schools distributed intelligence tests, so other variations of biopower tools. I know in my school, I also had BMI and vision tests, presidential fitness tests, the bane of my existence, prospective career tests, and psychological tests assigned in psych classes. In this way, schools monitor for and reproduce intellectual and physical disabilities by distinguishing which children do not fall into the quote-unquote average. Yes, schools work to subject students to control and surveillance, but they also serve to observe and categorize our youth. With these tests and tools inflicted upon the youth came categories and labels, which turned into the creation of symptoms and disabilities, which othered young people and stuck them into narrow classifications that they would have to address for the rest of their lives. One example of a disability that came out of mass literacy is acquired word blindness, which laid the foundation for congenital word blindness to be institutionally accepted. The inability to read was sculpted into a medical concern after a paper was published through the Royal Society in 1872 called Cerebral Mechanisms of Speech and Thought. The paper ascribed neurological correlations to word blindness, and a slurry of research papers followed until congenital word blindness was considered substantiated by science. While the loss of reading faculty had been observed and recorded by previous medical professionals, the Royal Society paper went a step further by creating a name for the condition, which is most likely why it took off at this point. A perfect example of how vocabularies are technologies of biopower. So we see these gradual strategic steps to legitimizing intellectual disabilities. Physicians advocated for building other regions of the brain to make up for the loss of reading faculty. The brain was previously ungovernable, but thus a subject's brain began to be seen as malleable. The public accepts and adopts technologies like this because they are supported by so-called experts. Let's look at one court case in New Jersey that shows how intertwined our society is with unwavering obedience to expert culture. In 2015, Anna Stubblefield, a tenured white female teacher, pled not guilty in a courtroom where she was being accused of raping a black, nonverbal man who had cerebral palsy. Stubblefield was recruited by the man's family to help him learn to use facilitated communication through a keyboard. He required assistance holding his wrist. Through the facilitated communication, they eventually had an intimate relationship. When his family found out, they took Stubblefield to court. Throughout the case, a bell curve and an IQ test were used as evidence of the man's inability to consent. But the man was never once given the opportunity to represent himself, not even given the chance to use facilitated communication through a third party, even though he had shown prior success. He was placed in front of the jury for less than 2 minutes and introduced as demonstrable evidence. His disability made a spectacle of, in an ultimate act of subjectification and dehumanization. This case has ultimately been used as an example by people looking to discredit facilitated communication. In this case, the courts showed their allegiance by siding with governing tools that subjectify bodies, while not representing tools that reproduce agency, like facilitated communication. All of the printed text that we saw throughout this video, most of it is advertisements that are selling us products we can buy with the money we make while working for the society that simultaneously takes our voices away. By writing and publishing our own work, we provide balance to these overwhelmingly capitalist texts. We can simultaneously be our own machineries of biopower, a biopower that uplifts us out of the days of subjecthood that we have been lulled into. We can be channels for agency and provide vocabularies and definitions that reproduce positive idealizations of who we are. I post all of these episodes on Substack. It is free to create a Substack page and to publish work online. I encourage you to do so. Our society has now moved to an age of digital literature and AI, and governing bodies are on top of it because they want to be the overwhelming vocabularies that we see. We can all do our part to make sure we disrupt that biased noise. This has been another episode of Disposable Society. Just a note, if you have any recipes that utilize the typically disposed of parts of food, like broccoli stalks or cauliflower stalks, aquafaba, melon innards, please post it below. I'm trying to curate a disability culture on this page, and anything that you can provide would be helpful, and any ideas that you have would also be helpful. Until next time, upcycle what you can.